Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here and welcome to my review of the 1992 erotic crime thriller film Basic Instinct, which I am watching as part of my multiplex contemporary popular cinema module at university. It's part of my course. So the plot of Basic Instinct is that a San Francisco police officer, Nick Curran, played by Michael Douglas, is investigating the murder of a former rock star who may have been murdered by his girlfriend, novelist Catherine Trammell, played by Sharon Stone. However, um, during the case, Nick Curran starts to form a attachment and then a relationship with Catherine, and his judgment starts to be clouded. Furthermore, Catherine is very smart and very capable of avoiding guilt and blame, and manages to make it seem that she was not the killer, even though she is the prime suspect. She makes it look like she's innocent and someone else has committed the crime. And over the course of the film, further people die, whether murdered by the killer or in an attempt to kill Nick himself. Um, and there are quite a few twists and turns throughout the film. But at the same time, the film still makes us wonder whether Catherine really is the killer or not. It's great in building that suspense and tension and mistrust with the audience, as they're uncertain who it is who's actually doing it, whether Catherine really is the killer and she's manipulating Nick, or if she's telling the truth and the events are just very similar to what she writes in the novels, because her novels have very similar stuff going on to what happens later on. She writes about something and then something actually happens, or it's inspired by something that's happened. But the film is very good at keeping the audience on the edge of their seat, so to speak, because of this tension, whether Catherine is the killer and is Nick in danger when he's seeing her, or is someone else out there copying the stuff from her books and committing the murders in out there, and maybe even trying to frame her, perhaps. That is what this film's about. This film is to build a mistrust between the main character and the main male character and the main female character. It's to build mistrust, uncertain whether to keep us uncertain whether Catherine is telling the truth or if she is indeed a psychopathic murderer. And that is genius. That is absolutely genius. And the way it's done throughout the film is brilliantly done. It creates us a great suspense and great tension throughout the film. Also giving us hints to, is it her, or hints to for another character to be the one responsible for what's happened. I won't spoil the ending because I think you should see the movie if you're over the age of 18. If you're under 18, I would not recommend watching this movie because there is a lot of sex in it, and it's full-on sex. I actually applaud the actors for actually doing quite a lot of the sex scenes themselves. I'm sure there's plenty of films where actors do actually have sex with each other for the film, where they're playing their characters, of course, but they physically have sex instead of having doubles do it, or acting it, and you don't really see it properly because it's from acting, but they don't have to do it properly. It's just acting the movements. Like maybe if you see the top half of the bodies in the bed, they would be pretending to do what's happening in the bottom half. But no, there's quite a lot of sex in this, and I applaud the actors for doing it and making it realistic, and it works with the story because Catherine's character is very she enjoys a lot of sex. I would say sex mad, but I'm not sure if that's right. But she definitely enjoys sex, especially rough sex, and it's also quite important for the plot as it's during a moment of the former rock star Johnny Brazo is whilst having sex with Catherine, or with someone who looks like Catherine, and then gets murdered in the bed. So it's during that, and it also creates a lot of tensions when there's moments where we're wondering, is she going to kill Nick whilst they're having sex, in a similar way to what happened to Johnny Braz. So it does play quite an important story, and also it does tighten some of the relationships together. For starters, the main relationship between Nick and Catherine, it's tightened through their sexual relationships, as well as falling in love with each other. Well, he's falling in love with her, at least. Um, they're building this sexual relationship. Alongside that, there's also Nick having a sexual relationship with his psychiatrist, not psychiatrist, psychological evaluator, a woman called Beth. So they're having a few moments there. And also, Catherine has a girlfriend because she's a bisexual character. At least I think she's supposed to be bisexual, um, or doesn't care. She just enjoys sex. She doesn't care who it's with, and she has a girlfriend, so they probably have a few moments together. That does lead me to one criticism about the movie. I do have to present, and this I believe was this is a controversial film, and I think the reason was because it's trying to mix psychotic murderer and bisexuality or lesbianism. So you have female characters in this film, with the exception of a character called Hazel, who I don't think has her sexuality announced on screen. It's never said. Besides her, the female characters in this film are bisexual or lesbian, and all of them, and all of the female characters are either presented or alluded to being psychotic murderers. So yeah, so that doesn't really help representation, neither on the LGBT side, or the fact that it's all the female characters in the film, or at least all the main female characters, are presented as psychotic killers. Um, there is one other character, a male character, who might be gay, but it's never said on screen, and that's the character Gus. Again, he's not outright said to be gay. He doesn't say, "By the way, I'm gay." It's alluded to, but it's not really openly said. So the only positive LGBT representation in the film, it never actually gets stated. So there really isn't that much positive LGBT representation, and there isn't really much positive female representation once the character Beth starts to be alluded to as being the killer instead of Catherine. But even then, Catherine is still such a is still a manipulative character, and hard to read and quite difficult and manipulative. Then we're still uncertain whether she did do it or didn't do it, and we're now starting to think, did Beth do it now? So this film isn't very good when it comes to LGBT representation, nor representation of women. I mean, the female characters aren't bad, but all are or are alluded to be psychotic killers, and all of the LGBT characters, with the possible exception of one, alluded to one, to be precise, are also psychotic killers, with the possible exception of one, but their one is never actually said on screen. So yeah, I think this is something the second film actually improves on. This is probably the only thing the second film improves on. I have seen the second one as well. I watched it a day later. Actually, in time recording, I watched the second film yesterday and the first film the day before. With the second film, I believe it's a bit more of a grey area. There are some male characters who are presented to be in the wrong, as there are to be in the right, and the same with female characters. Not every single female character in that film is a psychotic murderer, but there's only really one female character who's presented as a psychotic killer. Also, in the first film, all of the victims on the screen are men, apart from one female character's accidental death. And most of the alluded to deaths that took place before are also male, with one exception there as well. There's also another female death in the first film, but that's caused by Nick rather than the killer of the film. Again, with the second film, it kind of has a bit more of a balance, as there is a female victim amongst the men, and there is a female character who is a protagonist, who doesn't get killed as well, who's in that film. So there's a bit more of a grey area with the second film, but here in this film, it's a bit more black and white. So if you're an LGBT woman, or heck, it's just a woman in this film, you're possibly going to be a psychotic killer. And if you're a man, even if you're LGBT, you're probably going to be a good guy. At worst, you're a prick, like that cop who got shot in the head. But at worst, for this film, men are pricks, but with women, they're psychotic killers, especially if they're LGBT, which that hasn't aged well. That has definitely not aged well. It's not too prominent in the story. It's not too prominent. You can forget about it whilst watching the scenes, but in terms of a context, it hasn't aged too well. Not to say that this film is dated or anything, but it's an idea that hasn't really aged well. Maybe if we got a positive LGBT female character in this film, maybe another character who worked, maybe a policewoman who was gay and didn't die at the end, then we could have had some positive representation with her. Um, or at the very least, have that gay man that come out as gay openly. Those are the only real problems with this film. It's really the depiction of LGBT women in this film. They're all psychotic murderers, and all of the women in this film are psychotic murderers. Well, all of the main female characters, at least, and the only one positive LGBT character doesn't really come out as LGBT on at least in dialogue. They also get murders as well, so yeah, not much helpful. Again, this is why I think the second film improves on this bit. It's the only aspect the second film improves on, but um, yeah, it's a element. On a cinematic level, this one is really great. There's some great moments, great scenes. You'll remember. I'm sure many of you will know the interrogation room scene, and with Sharon Stone using her sex to baffle the police officers in the room and try to get them all confused whilst interrogating her. Um, so that's a great moment. That's brilliantly done. I think the script is really tightly written and the direction is brilliant. And as I mentioned earlier, the tension is brilliant. I also love the car chasing that ends with a accidental death when a character tries to kill Nick. It's not the murderer, but it's it's another character, and they try to kill Nick themselves because of their jealousy of Nick and Catherine's relationship. So they try to kill him, and when they fail to do it the first time, there's a great car chase when Nick chases down after them, and eventually, when confronting them, the car has the attempted killer's car swerves and it crushes down into a building site and it causes the death of the character driving that. Who we then later find out was also a psychotic killer themselves. And I thought that was a fantastic scene. It felt very much like a car chase scene from a Bond film. It worked so brilliantly. In fact, if you could take that scene out of context and you could tell someone who hasn't seen either of this film or any of the Bond films and say, this is from a Bond film, let's go with A View to a Kill because, for example, because that's set in San Francisco, you could say that if it wasn't for the actors in the scene, you could say it was from a View to a Kill, and anyone who hasn't seen this film or that film wouldn't be any wiser to the fact that that person was lying, and they'd be expecting to see that when they watched A View to a Kill. Actually, I think it's better than the actual fire truck chase in that film that did take place in the San Francisco streets, and the Paris car chase one as well. So yeah, I thought that was handled brilliantly. So overall, I thought this film was a really tightly written script and a really tightly directed film. Everything just works so well, with the exception of LGBT and female representation, with the main characters at least, because of the issues I brought up earlier, with all of the female characters supposedly being or alluded to being psychotic killers, and most of them being LGBT, and that not being really represented very well due to the characters being villains. Plus, also one character who's alluded to be LGBT but never stated on screen, and that guy dies anyway. So, still not very good representation. So, overall, I will be giving Basic Instinct a 9 out of 10. I was going to give it a 10. However, the issues with the representation, it's it is dated and it doesn't feel right. And I can see why some people were upset about it. Although how they found out whilst the film was being made about this story, I'm not quite sure. And after the movie comes out, I can see why people would get upset. But whilst the movie was in production and people trying to disrupt the movie, with protests about this, how on earth did they find out about this story? It's not based on a book or anything. This is an original script to movie. Did someone talk about it or something? Um, the news information get released about the film, about this plot? I'm not sure. But yeah, it is the representation that does let the film down. And even back in the 1990s, it would still be seen as an issue, as there wasn't really much positive representation for LGBT characters, with the exception of that one guy who never really gets it stated, and no real proper representation of female characters. There is the one person who seemed to be the shining light of that, is then later alluded to be the actual killer. It's hints are starting to point towards her instead. So in the end, it's either you are or you're alluded to. That's the point. If we had one positive LGBT female character in this film, that could have helped a little bit. But as it is, um, it is a bit disappointing of that the representation is pretty weak in this film for the most parts. So that was my review of Basic Instinct. I thought it was a fantastic film, with the exception of the representation, and even for 1992, it was still problematic. If it was 1952 or 1932, it still wouldn't be as good. It still would be a bit off, but very off, I should say. It would still be very off, but it'd be more forgivable because they're older films. They wouldn't understand it as well. But 1992, they would understand it. So it is a bit just misguided with that. Anyway, that's it from my review of Basic Instincts. The next film I am watching for my multiplex contemporary popular cinema module is 9 to 5, which is a 1980 black comedy slash musical, written and starring Dolly Parton. So I'll see you guys for that. But the next review will be Basic Instinct 2, which I also watched, as I mentioned. So I shall see you guys next time, whether for Basic Instinct 2 or 9 to 5 or anything else that comes this way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne Retro YouTube channel.